My daughter and her husband moved into my house to help me out. 3 months later, they handed me a one-way ticket to Sunrise Gardens Memory Care and started repainting my walls. What they didn't know was that I'd already talked to my accountant. Let me tell you how this started. I came to America from South Korea in 1976 with $40, a suitcase full of tools I couldn't name in English, and a brother-in-law who let me sleep on his couch in Glendale, California, for 11 months before I wore out my welcome. I found work at a tile company in Burbank, sweeping floors, mixing grout, unloading trucks. By 1979, I was setting tile myself. By 1984, I had a crew of 7. By 1991, Esio Custom Tile and Stone was the preferred contractor for 3 of the largest home builders in the San Fernando Valley. I built that business with my hands. Not metaphorically. I have the arthritis to prove it. My wife passed in 2019 after 38 years of marriage. Lung cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the day I sat in the parking lot of Cedars Sinai and couldn't remember how to start the car. After she was gone, the house on Fieldcrest Drive felt like a museum I lived inside. 4 bedrooms, a kitchen she'd renovated twice, a backyard where my granddaughter used to run through the sprinklers on summer afternoons when everything was still simple. The house appraised at $1.4 million in 2022. I owned it free and clear, paid off the mortgage in 2009, and told nobody because I'd learned a long time ago that people treat you differently when they know you have money. My daughter is 41. She married a man I'll call my son-in-law. I have no other name for him that I can say out loud without my blood pressure going up. He sells commercial real estate in Encino, drives a lease he probably can't afford, always has an opinion about things he knows nothing about. For the first year after my wife passed, my daughter called every Sunday, then every other Sunday. Then she'd text instead. I understood. She has her own life, her own grief, her own schedules. I didn't complain. I'm not built for complaining. What I noticed slowly was that whenever she did call, she started asking about the house. Casual questions at first. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? Fieldcrest is a lot to maintain for one person, isn't it? My friend's father sold his place in Northridge and put the money in an annuity. He's very comfortable now. I'm 69 years old and I understand subtext. Then in January 2023, my daughter and her husband came for dinner. She made galbi because she knows I love it. He brought a bottle of wine that cost more than my first week's paycheck in 1976. We sat at my kitchen table and they told me they were concerned about me. Dad, you've been alone for 4 years, my daughter said. She was holding my hand, which she never does. We worry. I'm fine, I said. You left the stove on last month, my son-in-law said. I had, in fact, left the stove on for 12 minutes while I walked to the mailbox. Nothing happened. No damage, no fire. My daughter had called twice that day, and the second time I mentioned it, offhand, not as something serious. I hadn't thought about it again until that moment, watching my son-in-law use it like evidence. That happens to everyone, I said. It happens to people who are starting to have trouble, he said. He said it gently. That's what I remember most, how gentle he was, like he was doing me a favor. They proposed that they move in with me temporarily. My daughter would work from home, help me with appointments, groceries, the things I theoretically couldn't manage. My son-in-law would handle maintenance. We'll take care of you, Dad. You won't have to worry about anything. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I am, by nature, a private person. I built my company by trusting my instincts and trusting very few people. But she was my daughter. I had watched her learn to walk in the hallway off the kitchen. I decided to trust her. They moved in February 15th, 2023. By March, my son-in-law had turned the guest room into a home office. By April, my daughter had hired a cleaning service that rearranged everything in my kitchen. By May, she had scheduled me 3 appointments with a geriatric specialist without asking me first, because she was just being proactive. The geriatric specialist was a very pleasant woman who asked me to draw a clock, remember 3 words, and count backward from 100 by 7s. I did all of it correctly. The specialist told my daughter, in front of me, that I showed no signs of cognitive decline, and that my blood pressure and cholesterol were excellent for my age. My daughter thanked her, and then in the parking lot told me that the test wasn't comprehensive. I said nothing. I filed it. June came. My son-in-law started having work calls at my kitchen table at 7 in the morning. He had an office. He had a home office. He chose my kitchen table. I started eating breakfast in my own bedroom to avoid him. which is not something a man should have to do in the house he built his life inside. Then, on the night of June 19th, 2023, I couldn't sleep. Came downstairs at 11:30 for water. The kitchen light was on, and I heard voices from the family room, my daughter and her husband, door halfway open, speaking in low tones they thought wouldn't carry. I have been a contractor for 40 years. I have attended hundreds of planning meetings. I know what it sounds like when two people are dividing up assets that don't belong to them. I stood in the hallway, and I listened. The appraisal was 1.4, my son-in-law was saying. But with what the market's doing in this zip code, we could list at 155s and take $1.48 easy. Maybe 1.5s if we stage it right. He's not going to sell, my daughter said. He doesn't have to agree, that's the whole point. Once the conservatorship goes through, we control the asset decisions. We list it, we handle the transaction, proceeds go into the trust we manage. Silence. He's not incompetent, my daughter said. Quieter now. He left the stove on. He missed 2 pill doses in March. Dr. Felton says he has mild anxiety and early sleep disruption. That's enough to file. The standard is whether he can protect his own financial interests, and we have documentation that he can't. Dr. Felton was my GP. I had been seeing him for 12 years. The 2 missed pill doses were blood pressure medication. Both in the same week I drove to Sacramento to help my old foreman move his mother. The anxiety diagnosis was from a grief counseling session my daughter had encouraged me to attend after my wife died. I had attended 4 sessions and found them unhelpful. That was 2020. My son-in-law had been building a file. What about Sunrise Gardens? My daughter asked. Good facility. $12,000 a month, but that comes out of his accounts. We're not paying for it, and once he's placed, we list the house, close in 60 days. By fall, we're liquid. I went back upstairs. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, where my wife used to read, and I thought about what my father told me the week before I left Korea. He said, "The people who take from you will always call it helping. The people who truly help you will never keep score." I had stopped keeping score with my daughter somewhere around the time she turned 7 and brought home a drawing of our house with me and her mother standing in front of it. I should have kept score. The next morning at 6 a.m., I drove to the office of my accountant and attorney, a man named Mr. Johansson, who had been handling my business affairs since 1998. He was in the office early because he is always in the office early. I closed his door and I told him everything I had heard. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How quickly can they file?" I said I didn't know. Probably had already started, he said. Then we moved today. The next 8 hours were the most expensive and most satisfying of my life. Mr. Johansson put 3 things in motion. First, a full cognitive and neurological evaluation, not with Dr. Felton, but with a specialist at UCLA, who my attorney had used in competency hearings before. Second, a formal transfer of my primary business interest in CO custom tile and stone into an irrevocable trust structured so that no conservator could liquidate or encumber the asset without court approval from a judge who had no connection to the petition my son-in-law was planning to file. Third, a letter to my daughter's husband's real estate license board, documenting that he had, on at least 2 occasions I could verify, discussed the sale of a property he did not own and had no authority to list. That last one wasn't legal strategy. That was personal. I went home that afternoon and made dinner. Pork belly and rice, the way I always make it on Tuesday. My daughter came downstairs and we ate together, and she asked how my day was, and I said it was fine. I asked how her day was. She said fine. My son-in-law came in at 7 and poured himself a drink and told us about a deal he was working on in Calabasas. I nodded and listened, and said nothing about what I had done. The cognitive evaluation was scheduled for Thursday. I arrived at UCLA Medical Center at 8 in the morning. Dr. Narayanan, a neuropsychologist who has testified as an expert witness in conservatorship proceedings in California for over 20 years, administered a comprehensive battery over 3 hours. Memory tests, executive function, spatial reasoning, verbal fluency, processing speed, depression screening, anxiety assessment, the full picture. When she was finished, she told me my scores placed me in the top 20 percentile for men my age across every category. She also told me, gently, that she had seen my presentation before, that it was common for adult children to interpret a grieving parent's withdrawal and exhaustion as cognitive decline. That grief looks like a lot of things from the outside. I told her my daughter wasn't misinterpreting. I told her what I'd heard in the family room. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'll want this documented very thoroughly. It was. 11 days after the night in the hallway, Mr. Johansson called to tell me that my daughter and son-in-law had filed a conservatorship petition in Los Angeles Superior Court. The petition cited the stove incident, the missed medications, the anxiety diagnosis, testimony from my son-in-law that I had expressed confusion about my finances during a conversation in April, a conversation I remembered clearly because I had been explaining to him, calmly, why I would not be adding him to the deed. He had turned my refusal into evidence of my incompetence. The petition requested that they be appointed co-conservators of my person and estate, granting them authority over my medical decisions, living arrangements, and financial affairs. I read it twice. Then I put it down and called my daughter. "I saw the petition," I said. She was quiet for a very long time. "Dad, it's not what it looks like." "What does it look like?" "We're trying to protect you. You need more support than we can give you at home. Sunrise Gardens is a beautiful facility. You'd have everything you need, and you'd have the house. The money would go into a trust, for your care, a trust you control." Another long silence. "Dad, you have to trust us." I thought about what my father said, about the people who call taking helping. "I do trust you," I said. "I trusted you enough to let you move into my home. That was my mistake. It won't happen again." I hung up. The conservatorship hearing was set for August 4th. My daughter and son-in-law apparently believed I had no attorney, no plan, no awareness that this was even coming. That is what happens when people see a 69-year-old Korean man who doesn't drive a lease and doesn't talk about his money, and decide he must not understand how things work. I have always understood how things work. 2 weeks before the hearing, I called my foreman, Gil, who has worked for me for 22 years. I asked him to think back to every time in the past year he had seen me confused, disoriented, or unable to make sound decisions at work. He laughed, not unkindly. He said, "Boss, last month you caught a materials discrepancy that saved us $40,000. What do you need from me?" I told him I needed a written statement. I called 3 of my long-term clients. All 3 had worked with me within the past year on active projects. All 3 confirmed I had been sharp, engaged, professional throughout. All 3 agreed to submit written statements. I called my doctor, not Dr. Felton, my internist of 15 years, who had not been consulted for the petition. She pulled my records and informed me that the anxiety notation from 2020 grief counseling had been significantly mischaracterized in the petition language. She also noted that my son-in-law had called her office the previous October asking general questions about my health. She had declined to share anything citing privacy law, but she had found it unusual enough to document. She submitted a statement as well. The night before the hearing, my daughter knocked on my bedroom door. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed where her mother used to sit. She looked tired. She looked like she did the year she was 13 and failed a math final and thought I would be disappointed. "Dad," she said, "I'm sorry." I waited. He told me it was the right thing. He had charts, projections, this whole presentation about your assets and your care costs and the investment potential of the house. He made it sound like we were helping. Were you helping? She looked at her hands. "I don't know. I thought, maybe if you were at a place like Sunrise Gardens, you'd be around people. Less lonely, and if the house was, I didn't think about it as stealing. I thought about it as," she stopped, "as solving a problem," I said. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I love you," I told her. "I have loved you every day of your life. But what you filed is not something I can pretend didn't happen. I'll see you in court tomorrow." She left without another word. The hearing was in Department 5 of the Probate Division, Los Angeles Superior Court. August 4th, 9 a.m. I wore the same suit I wore to my wife's funeral, because it is the only suit I own that fits me properly, and it reminds me that I have survived worse than courtrooms. My son-in-law arrived with his attorney and 2 associates. He looked confident. He nodded at me like a colleague at a conference. I said nothing. Mr. Johansson sat beside me, with 4 inches of documentation and the untroubled expression of a man who has won this kind of case before. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, who had the look of someone who has seen every variety of family dysfunction and remains unimpressed by all of it. She reviewed both petitions before a word was spoken. She noted that a counter-petition had been filed, that independent medical evaluation had been submitted, and that character testimony from business associates and clients had been included. "Mr." She glanced at the petition. The petitioner claims cognitive impairment based on a stove incident, 2 missed medication doses, and a grief counseling notation from 2020. Is that the sum of the medical evidence? My son-in-law's attorney said there were also family observations. Family observations from the petitioner himself and co-petitioner who have a direct financial interest in the outcome, the judge said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. My son-in-law's attorney started to explain that the standard was protection of the elder's interests. The judge held up one hand. She asked my attorney to present. Mr. Johansson walked her through the UCLA evaluation. He walked her through the business records, the client statements, the foreman's testimony, the internist's records. He submitted the documented phone call my son-in-law had made to my internist's office. He submitted the real estate listing research I had found on my son-in-law's laptop. I had looked, after the night in the hallway, carefully and photographed what I needed. The judge examined the listing research for a long time. Then she turned to my son-in-law. You prepared a comparative market analysis for this property, she said. I was exploring options, he said, in case it became relevant. It became relevant before you had legal authority to act on it, the judge said. That's a problem. The petition was denied. Fully. The judge also issued a note. Not a sanction, a formal note for the record, that the filing appeared to have been made in bad faith, and that the court would be forwarding the matter to the California State Bar for review of the conduct of counsel in preparing the petition documentation. My son-in-law's attorney went pale. Outside the courthouse, on the steps, my daughter stood apart from her husband. She did not look at him. She looked at me. Dad, she said. I know, I said. I know it's complicated. I know you are not only the person who filed that petition. I know you are also the person who brought me Galby in January and held my hand and was, in some part of herself, genuinely afraid for me. I know people can be both things at once. I know because I have been a contractor for 4 decades, and I have learned that structures fail not because of one bad beam, but because of small compromises over a long period of time. I drove home alone. My son-in-law moved out the following weekend. He did not speak to me. He carried boxes to a rented truck with the expression of a man who still can't quite believe someone outmaneuvered him. I watched from the upstairs window. I felt no satisfaction, and I want to be honest about that. I had expected to feel something sharper. What I felt was tired. My daughter stayed in the house 2 more weeks, sleeping in the guest room, moving carefully around me like I was something fragile. One evening she came to the kitchen while I was cooking and stood in the doorway. "Can I help?" she asked. I handed her the green onions. She stood next to me and sliced them the way her mother taught her. We didn't speak for a long time. "I'm going to stay with Aunt Suna for a while," she finally said. "My sister-in-law, out in Riverside. I need to figure some things out." "That's good," I said. "Dad, I want you to know that, whatever happens with him, you're still my father." "I know that," I said. "You're still my daughter. That's not a thing that changes." She nodded and went back to slicing. After she left, I walked through the house room by room, the kitchen with its twice-renovated layout, the hallway where she learned to walk, the backyard where the sprinklers still work, because I maintain this house, and I always have. I sat in the chair by the window where my wife used to read, and I watched the light change on the hills. The house is still mine. I want to be clear about that, because I know there are people who wonder. The conservatorship was denied, the house was never listed, and my name is on the deed, the same deed I signed in 1989, when I bought this lot for $180,000 and started pouring the foundation myself. 2 months after the hearing, I did make one change to the property. I had Mr. Johansson draft a new estate plan. Not a trust controlled by anyone who has a financial interest in my death, but a properly structured arrangement that puts the house, upon my passing, into a fund supporting vocational training for first-generation Korean immigrants in Los Angeles County. A scholarship program. The kind of thing that would have changed my first year here in ways I still find hard to imagine. My business partner's daughter asked me why that, specifically. She is 26 and just started in the trades, and she asks questions the way young people do when they still believe the answers matter. I told her, because somebody should get the ladder. My daughter and I speak on the phone twice a week now. Not about the house, about her life, her plans, what she's figuring out in Riverside, about my granddaughter, who will be 9 in November and has her grandmother's eyes. About nothing in particular, the way you talk when you're rebuilding something slow and you've learned not to push the weight-bearing walls too fast. My son-in-law's real estate license is under review. I did not do anything to accelerate that. The board moves at its own pace. Last Tuesday morning, I drove to the Fieldcrest job site. My crews are finishing a kitchen remodel in Burbank, and I walked the space and caught a grouting inconsistency along the backsplash that would have caused problems in 6 months. I pointed it out. My foreman shook his head and grinned. Nobody else would have caught that, he said. I told him that's why I still show up. I drove home on the 134, windows down, radio off, past the exit I used to take when my wife was alive, and we'd stop for Vietnamese on Friday evenings. I got off at my exit, pulled into my driveway, walked into my house. A man who knows how to build things also knows how to protect what he builds. That's not stubbornness. That's just the first thing you learn when everything you have, you made yourself.